Well, thank you, Sonny. That was astonishing. You don't look like the biggest farmer in the world, but you really are. You've been doing this for just 3 decades, 3.4 million hectares. I think you will last 1,000 years, actually. And I love what you did when you said, I'm not going to read my speech. I'm going to speak from the heart. Because at the end of the day, yes, it's about business. Yes, it's about doing the calculations. That's terribly important. But at the end of the day, it is what kind of leader you want to be. And we deeply appreciate the leadership that you are providing in this. I'm just going to show you a few slides just to make sure we're all on the same page. Won't surprise you. I'd like to say just 3 things. The first thing I'd like to say is, well done. We have just left the most successful quarter century in the history of the world. Poverty has fallen more than ever before in history, and the global undernourished population has fallen as a share by about half. Those of you in this room and the companies you represent deserve enormous credit for making this happen. And as we approach issues of sustainability, sometimes it's very easy to say, my goodness me, we've made mistakes, we need to do better, which is true, but it's very important to start with the fact that this has been a triumph. That's because remarkable ingenuity, as we heard from Alyssa Lin earlier on today, incredible yields. This is cereals, not in Africa, but certainly in other parts of the world, even more so in the oils here, especially in Asia. Again, sadly, not in Africa, which remains an enormous challenge. And all of this happened at a period of astonishing volatility of prices. So this is a huge achievement. So point number 1, well done. An amazing achievement. Point number 2, the task now is much more difficult. And that's why we're here today. We need, because there are going to be 9.6 billion people in the world in 2050, we need, and because 3 billion more will enter the middle class, we need about 70% more food being consumed by 2050 than 2006. That will require a rate of increase of food production greater than in the last 40 years. And by the way, at a time when water variability, as Sonny said, will be much, much greater, at a time when we have to worry much more about greenhouse gas emissions. Today, the agricultural sector is responsible for 24% of all greenhouse gas emissions. At a time when there are growing concerns of sustainability, which also, by the way, provides some opportunity for increased profitability. As you see down there, 66% of consumers in 40 countries that were surveyed said they'd be willing to pay a little more for sustainable brands. At a time when there are growing criticisms that basically say, wait a minute, the private sector is making the money whilst they are hurting the rest of us by all of the externalities. And at a time when we need to really dig deep in understanding why we have generally failed on the smallholder issue. So these are difficult issues. Let me just put that in context with regard to greenhouse gas emissions. This is the total amount of greenhouse gas emissions that we will be able to emit in 2050 if we are to limit increases to 2 degrees Celsius. So today it's about twice this amount. If we were to continue to emit exactly the same amount of greenhouse gases from agriculture as we do today, even as we increase the product by 70%, if we just kept it where it was today, that would account for more than half of all of the emissions. So in other words, this is quite untenable because there wouldn't be enough left for energy. And remember, we have to increase output by 70%. This gives a sense. So we can't have the luxury of moving into more land anymore. This is the average annual yield of growth for the last 40 years in world agriculture. If we were not to increase the acreage, this is what the increase per year would have to be between now and 2050. And that is a 1/3 increase at a time when water's going to be more difficult and all the other issues. So this gives a sense of the challenge that we have. So that's the second point I want to make. First, well done. Second, it's going to be a difficult journey, so we need each other. Point number 3, there are things going on out there that we need to pay attention to and can be helpful. The first Sunny referred to, for the first time in human history, we have goals that are universal. It's easy to look at the Sustainable Development Goals and say, my goodness me, they're so complicated, 169 targets. We have never, as a civilization, got together 195 countries to say, we agree with this, and by the way, if we're to achieve these, the private sector has to play a central, perhaps the central role, and the agribusiness industry is central to this. Tonight, Paul Pullman, I'm sure, will be telling us about the Global Commission that is looking precisely. That's a sort of a new and important thing that's a starting point. Second really important thing is we now have ways of monitoring that we never had before. We heard about that actually from Melissa Lin earlier on. Let me give you one example that we're responsible for together with Google and many other companies. We now have the ability to zoom down basically every week, and we have the ability to look, this happens to be palm oil concessions in Kalimantan, and we have the ability every week to see deforestation taking place. That's the pink, and you can go through it like that. We can see exactly where everything takes place, whether it's in a national park, whether it's outside of what's legally accepted, and therefore, as a result of that, because we know, and it's not us, the world now knows who's doing what in remote corners of the earth, and we can see that. And so, too, we have the ability through DNA to actually, even in paperback books, in Florida recently, using DNA, we were able to say that the paper in that had illegal logged wood. So we now live in a world where actually behaving well can be monitored and rewarded. And that is an extremely important development. And the third and final development, which is hugely relevant to us today, is that there is a new kind of private leadership out there. It is not just government to government anymore. This is a group of CEOs in Paris last year that got together and said, this for us as a group is so important, we are going to fight for a climate change deal. The climate deal at Paris would not have been as strong had it not been for private leadership. And so too, we're seeing in a whole range of areas, we're seeing pre-competitive engagement that is leading to change. You think of palm oil. I mean, just 5 years ago, there were no companies that were committed to deforestation free. Now 92% of those who trade and produce palm oil are committed to deforestation free. That would not have happened if individuals had simply acted on their own. Consider food loss and waste, a remarkable thing. Do you know if food loss and waste were a country, it would be the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases in the world. We lose $1 trillion a year due to food loss and waste. 1/3 of food is lost or wasted every year. Food loss and waste uses an area the size of China to plant and harvest, and then it's thrown away or wasted. Why do I raise that now? Is because, for example, the Consumer Goods Forum is now committed to deal with food loss and waste, to halve food loss and waste by 2025. As a group, they've got together and they said, how can we learn from each other? And that's precisely the kind of thing that the GAA is hopefully going to look at as part of the agri-business. This, don't read every word, but this indicates the kind of way that companies now are coming together. These companies, 179, have said, we are going to adopt science-based targets. That means we're not just going to do better on greenhouse gases, we're going to do enough on greenhouse gases, and we're quite happy to open our books and have anybody look at them. We are going to be the solution. This is a revolutionary thing that is happening. And there we are. So the final slide. Look, the challenge before us, which we're now going to go into a discussion period, is really a serious one. But it's also an exciting one that has huge opportunities. Obviously, this is a very competitive industry. Obviously, this industry does not have the history of collaboration that some other industries even do. But we've got to figure out a way of approaching these difficult, huge problems in a way that we can share experiences and learn. And that's why we're here today. Thank you very much indeed.